Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Good evening and welcome to Inside Scoop. I am filling in for your regular host, Bettina Lawton. And my guests tonight are Tarina Keene from NARAL Pro-Choice Virginia. She's the executive director. And Margie Vanderhye, who a lot of you will recognize as a former delegate to the Virginia House of Delegates from the 34th District. She's also a founding member of the Women's Strike Force, and she is on the Women's Action Committee of the Fairfax County Democratic Committee. So welcome this evening, ladies. We have a lot to talk about. One of the things I want to start at, first of all, is that Mark Rozelle did a debrief with the Dulles area Democrats earlier this morning, where he talked about, basically in a post-analysis way, what the data shows us about what were issues in this race and what were not issues in this race. And one of the things that stunned a lot of people is when he said that the pro-choice issue as a motivator or what brought people to the polls was a dud. That was his terminology, it was a dud. He said, you know, it could be that it motivated our base to come out, but the exit polling showed that that was not the issue that people were saying brought them to the polls. So given the election results, which, you know, we have a blue governor, a Democratic governor, Democratic lieutenant governor. We're still waiting to see if Mark Herring is going to be our Attorney General. But the fact of the matter is we only picked up net 1 seat for the Democrats in the House of Delegates. And of the 24 women who ran, the 12 incumbents were reelected and not a single woman candidate came away with a seat. So going forward, what does this mean? How do you guys read the tea leaves on what choice means, on why our candidates didn't do better when we really believed that was an issue that was going to be a deciding factor? Tarina? Go ahead.
Well, I have to disagree with Professor Rozelle because the exit polling data already shows that, and even post-analysis shows that 59% of women who actually went to the polls to vote on the pro-choice issue, on the issue of women's health and abortion access. There also was I thought, a pretty decent gender gap that is reflected too, a 9-point gender gap. So that tells me that this issue really did resonate with women. We know, looking back at 2012 with the presidential race, that one of the big issues in the Commonwealth was also women's health and rights issues, and that really put President Obama over the top to be reelected. In 2008, there was a 2-point gender gap. And that 2008, 4 years later, there was a 13-point gender gap in the presidential race. And generally, the gubernatorial race tends to not have a whole lot of turnout. But this year, absolutely. This year, we had a 12% increase in voter turnout. Almost 250,000 more people came out and voted in an off-year election than they did in 2009. So something motivated people to get out and vote. And I feel like this, you know, from just talking with voters, being out there, knocking on doors myself, talking to people on the phone, seeing our issue resonate. Also, our donor base has really increased over the last couple years, so that tells you something. Just the feedback that we were getting, and obviously the numbers of people who showed up at the polls really speaks loud and clear to me that this is a very important issue to the women of Virginia and men. We should not forget that they actually do.
And of course, in the Women's Strike Force, which was founded really
in 2012,
and it came right on the heels of the transvaginal probe legislation.
Absolutely, and I think the big difference that we saw between 2013 and 2009. In 2009, there was this sort of cumulative sense of relief following the election of Barack Obama over John McCain, and people thought they could rest on their laurels a little bit. Well, in 2012, the whole gang that came in from the 2009 gubernatorial election and subsequently decided to get really bold and crazy, and they enacted the transvaginal ultrasound probe, mandatory, and the woman had to pay for it. It couldn't be covered. And, you know, doctors get out of the way. We, the General Assembly, know best. And in addition, they came up with the personhood legislation. This is following the enactment of the TRAP regulations to regulate clinics that provide health services, including access to abortion services. So the difference was when you combine that group of bills and the reaction, the outrage against that kind of legislation, with the fact that Mitt Romney took it a step further and said, oh yes, we're going to defund Planned Parenthood and I'll do all these groups one better. People realized once they were able to turn that back that nobody was going to get a break in 2013. So you didn't see people kind of stepping back and resting on their successes. They really felt like we needed to dig in our heels, and I think that's where the 250,000 votes come from. As for Mark Rozell's poll, I think there's a big difference, Catherine, depending on whether you ask someone, when you went to the polls, was your access to an abortion your motivating decision, or was it something else? People will say, I want access to my own reproductive health care choices. I don't want someone telling me I can't get contraception. And I think these are basic bread and butter economic issues. When you put it like that, I think it resonated in a very dramatic way. And I think women in this Commonwealth were scared to death. And I think that's why we saw a much better, bigger turnout and why it mattered.
So the other point that he made is that Terry McAuliffe, for the first time ever, did not run to the right of the National Democratic Party. Mm-hmm. In years past, Tim Kaine, Mark Warner, other candidates have always ameliorated their positions on gun control and on LGBT rights. Terry was true to himself. He ran absolutely strong behind women's issues, strong behind the other issues that don't play well in the southern part of Virginia, and he got elected. That is something that absolutely we all need to be in shock and awe, that a progressive liberal person can run in this state and win. But there's still a tremendous gap between the people who won at the top and our lack of progress in the House, which is where this legislation is coming out of.
Because the people who ran at the House level ran away from their record. I mean, say what you will about Cuccinelli, he owned what he believed, and he was proud to tell you on any given day. Right. The House members, who were Republican incumbents, didn't want you to know about their social issues at all, and they did their best to hide them, to minimalize them, and say, oh, we're all about jobs and the economy, when in fact, they had terrible, socially divisive voting records that were just as bad as Cuccinelli's, but they didn't want their constituents to know about it because they knew they would not be winning issues for them.
So what do we do about that, Tarina?
Well, I think we also have to remember that in 2010 we had redistricting, and the Republicans were in control in the governor's mansion as well as in the House of Delegates, and there wasn't a whole lot of leeway in the Senate. And I think when we look at how they were redistricted, especially on the House side, it's almost unfathomable to see how a Republican can't win. And I mean, there are obviously some give and take on that in the Northern Virginia House
there
district.
Are bulletproof districts on the D side and the R side.
Absolutely, absolutely. But I think even though we had redistricting, if you look at these House races, many of these Republicans, these sitting Republicans, won by a razor's edge. And we're talking about John Bell down in Prince William and Loudoun. He lost by 150 votes. We have one race that's hanging by a thread right now by 54 votes, and that's Jennifer Boysko in Loudoun. And we also, Kathleen Murphy just lost hers with just over 400 votes. I mean, I could go on and on and on. And Atif Carney, who lost by a razor-thin margin, who was up against what I would call our arch nemesis when it comes to women's health and rights, Bob Marshall down in Prince William. And on and on and on we can go around the state and look at these razor-thin margins. When you're just talking about a few dozen or just a couple of hundred, that tells me that even though they redistricted and they had all this power, that something was motivating people to get out there. But because they're so skewed, it's really hard to get over that last little hump, no matter how many people you get out to vote. But I do believe that people were motivated, and if they continue attacks like these on women's health and rights, on LGBT issues, on some of these other social issues, that this is not mainstream thinking, and that they will continue to lose those races. And in 2 years, we could see a dramatic turnaround.
So, talking about things that affected this race, one of the things that he brought up, which I think we all knew, was the shutdown. He felt like the shutdown, the way it came, the fact that it affected Northern Virginians and people in Hampton Roads more than it did in other regions of Virginia, that really affected how people vote, who turned out, and the motivation of the voters. What also affected it, we cannot deny, is the rollout of Obamacare.
Right.
So we had something that helped us, something that hurt us. How do you see Obamacare, assuming that they get the kinks worked out and it moves forward, and we are absolutely able to show that this is a better system? How do each of you see that playing into who turns out and how they vote in 2 years, in 2015?
There was a wonderful article in the Washington Post today that was co-authored by 3 Democratic governors, and why Obamacare was working in their states and what they had done to make sure it worked. And one of the things they talked about was that they were not looking for it to fail. They were looking for it to succeed because they knew economically and politically and socially and morally it was the correct thing to do for all the people in their state. And so they went about it with the idea that we are going to make this work and we're going to make it succeed. I think when Obamacare does succeed, and it will, this will cease to be an issue in the next round of races, and the Republicans will still manage to be very divided, because there is a chasm between the people who live in some of the more urban areas, the people who, for instance, would be interested in joining the women's strike force because they're tired of the social issues and the punitive, intolerant, divisive kinds of legislation that drive wedges between people. And it's bad for business, it's bad for jobs, and it's bad for communities. When people like that start to band together and they see the advantages of health care for the population at large and what it means for the overall economy, I think you will see a shift. And that's what I think we're counting on. Whereas you can't turn a Tea Party person into Nelson Rockefeller. You just can't. And I think as we continue to see those divisions, we're going to be able to make gains as a result of it.
Absolutely. And we've just got a few more seconds before we go to a break. So I'd like to hear what you have to say, and then we will come back and continue with you. We'll continue with you after the break that we've got coming up. But I am so delighted to have both of you here. Thank you so much. I think we are totally enrapturing our audience here.
And we're talking.
That
goes fast.
Yes, it does.
It does.
It goes really fast.
So do we have another block that we're doing? Okay.
Absolutely, we do. Okay, so she's like, keep talking.
Right, that's what we're doing.
She's had more than a dozen fractures. And in the next few years, she faces 2 major surgeries.
Well, I know, because she's holding this thing up.
Fragile bones. She's only 10 years old. Most people don't worry about fragile bones until late in life. For those with osteogenesis imperfecta, brittle bones are a concern throughout their lifetime. Find out how you can strengthen this child's future.
Diabetes is a killer. After I was diagnosed, I didn't feel sick, so I didn't listen to my doctor. Then it struck. I had a heart attack, then a stroke, and I was only 49.
Most people with diabetes also have high blood pressure and cholesterol, which can cause severe heart damage. In fact, 2 out of 3 people with diabetes die from heart disease or stroke.
Don't let diabetes destroy your life.
Call for your free diabetes survival guide. Choose to live.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm Catherine Reed. I'm filling in for your regular host, Bettina Lawton. With me, I have Tarina Keene of NARAL Pro-Choice Virginia. She's the executive director. And Margie Vanderhye, former delegate in the 34th District and also with the Women's Strike Force and the Women's Action Committee of the FCDC. So when we left you, we were talking about what this means, what these issues mean, and what we know about the polling data for elections in 2015. How do we take back the House? So I'm going to turn to Tarina and ask her the same question. It's like, what do we do with what we know about trying to win those House seats back in 2015?
Well, we need to continue to educate people, especially on our issue. We need to watch closely about how Obamacare actually rolls out and keep talking to people and reminding them, especially around family planning issues, because Obamacare is giving women free birth control. And I think people will really like that. And they certainly won't like a tax on their birth control access. And we were talking about, even if we're talking about a personhood bill, who knows if that'll come back up in Virginia, but as we've seen in other states, once someone sets the ball in motion, it continues to come up over and over and over again. It's utterly ridiculous, and people are starting to know what it actually means. So I think trying to sort of gauge what's weighing on people's minds and continuing to educate people on the pros, the positive things that are happening around healthcare, and the negative attacks. Because I don't see this issue going away anytime soon. And as my experience has shown me is that when we have a pro-choice president and now a pro-choice governor, which has really not happened in Virginia in a long time, is that the rhetoric amps up, and the other side of this particular issue digs in their heels and gets even more motivated. So we could see a lot more coming our way. So I think we have to dig in our own heels and make sure that we are protecting against those attacks, while also keeping our eye on the ball for 2015 when we are electing and protecting pro-choice candidates. And what I've been telling our fabulous candidates that ran this past year, I mean, I was just so impressed with the slate of candidates that we had, male and female. And I've been telling them, just keep running. Don't stop. Show up at every event that you possibly can for the next year, and then next January, if possible, when the General Assembly starts and these other candidates can actually be out there actually actively campaigning, they should kick off their next round of campaign, their 2015 campaign, and just keep on going. I mean, it never hurts to let people know who you are and what you stand for, and remind them that you barely lost this last race, and that these issues are still important. The bread and butter issues, but the social issues are still going to be weighing on minds. We haven't beat it yet, and we need to remind people that just because we do have pro-choice leadership at the top of the state, which is absolutely fabulous, is that we can't sit back and say, oh, we're done. We're not. We still have a long way to go.
So in this state, you know, we're kind of an anomaly in that we are so close to Washington, D.C. Northern Virginia is a lot different from the rest of Virginia.
Oh, yes.
But we have been struggling to get women into the top offices for decades. Let's face it, women have had the vote. It'll be 100 years in 2020. 100 years we've had the vote. And we've had one woman in statewide office. That's Mary Sue Terry, who ran for governor. Remember, yes, and lost. And we have no women in Congress right now. We've only ever had 3. And in 2014, guess what? They're all up for re-election again. 11 congressional districts, 11 men,
right?
10 of them white men. What do we do about moving women forward, even beyond these issues? Because women candidates are more than about these issues. Mm-hmm. But the fact of the matter is we can't make inroads into these issues if we've got nobody sitting at the table.
And it's so interesting, isn't it, that even John McCain gave credit to the women senators about being able to broker
the grown-ups in the room.
The grown-ups in the room, because women tend to look at one another, they make eye contact, they sit down and think, how are we going to solve the problem, rather than who's going to look like the biggest macho victor at the end of recess on the playground. And I think that because women do that, they have a natural advantage in solving problems, but they are reluctant to get into the fray because while we get recruited assiduously and told, oh, it's great, you're going to bring a brand new brand of politics and brand new brand of dialogue and public service to the arena, then it is, how come you won't behave like a, you know, a scrappy playground fighter, because we want you to be just as down and dirty as you can get. So we have a real kind of paradox. Everybody proclaims that they just can't stand all of this negative politics and all of the brawling that goes on, and yet what gets people elected is absolute down and dirty brawling that goes on. So the first thing a woman is told when she runs for office is, we have to come up with all the ways to make you look tough and resilient and competent and determined. And when a man gets ready to run for office, they said, we're going to have to make you look nurturing and connecting and all those kinds of things, like you're a family man and you really care. Because there's these stereotypes about how we're all going to behave. The fact of the matter is, women are problem solvers, but they go about campaigns in a different way. And I think we have to have a real soul-searching conversation about what kind of a political campaign do you really want to have? And if you want it to be a certain way, and if you want the kind of government where people actually get things done, then we're going to have a real, you know, a real come to our senses about the kind of ways we train people. And that doesn't mean making women any less tough. It means running campaigns in a different way and looking at the way we do business.
And of course, you're running a statewide organization, so you've got people, and full disclosure, I am on the NARAL pro-choice PAC board too, so I sit in on these, and you've got a network all over the state. What are you hearing from around the state about emerging women who, do we have people anywhere who are going to step up for us next year?
That's a good question. I know that we have some really strong, competent women, and when I look at campaigns and I see what just happened down in Norfolk this past weekend, we had a three-way Democratic caucus, and we had two really great women, and we had a sitting delegate, a male, and I really do want to make sure that women who are strong on women's health issues, but on an array of issues, but that we continue to encourage them to get out. And I feel that these women were discouraged. And I feel like at the end of the day, they were. I did hear rumors of, you know, they were trying to get one of them out, and I said, well, okay, why does one of them have to back down? Why are we not talking to the other person in the race? So I think that there is. I think there's a reticence within the Democratic Party, and probably both parties, when it comes to women. It's like, oh, we'll just let one of them go forward, but you know, they're going to have to duke it out with this guy. And I just don't think that that's a smart way to play this. Is that I do want the policy issues to take precedent, but at the end of the day, we just have to do more and more recruiting of women. We have actually two women that are going to be running out in SD 33, yes. Senate District 33. Both of them very strong, very competent. It's very exciting, I have to say. So I'm hoping that, you know, at the end of the day, we're going to have a woman who's going to be running for this seat, which is great. But we have to make sure that we encourage the party to actually get behind one of those women and make sure that she has everything that she needs to put out the best campaign and to actually propel her to victory, because we actually need more women in the Senate. We need more women in the legislature across the board. Another thing that we need to focus on, I know we don't have an election for another couple of years, is making sure, as Margie said earlier, that women are at the table. And that's at the policy table. We need to, right now the McAuliffe administration has put together a very strong transition team, and we should be talking to these folks and saying, hey, I know a woman, a strong, confident, well-qualified woman that you should consider for these key positions in the cabinet, on boards, on commissions, or even just within the interagency jobs. We need to make sure that more and more women are filling those positions because, as Margie mentioned before, when we know a woman is at the table, we approach things a lot differently than when there's several men around the table trying to solve women's health issues.
So is this
need to be there.
So this sounds like a strategy, actually, doesn't it? So starting with our Democratic, liberal, progressive governor, to get women into positions where they become subject matter experts, policy experts, they get visibility, and the other thing, they get to know the other people with whom they work, and also people who are already in positions of influence. And this is something, there was an interesting article in yesterday's Sunday Post about a law firm who has a sponsorship program to try to move associates who are women and minorities up in the law firm, and it's a sponsorship program. And so understanding that women need to get ahead because men mentor them, advocate for the people already sitting at the table need to step up and help to recruit, groom, mentor, and advocate for women so they are part of our legislative collective. Right. And I think this is a great idea that you have. How do we go about getting out the word? I know you sent a letter to NARAL. Do you have plans with Women's Strike Force or with the Women's Action Committee to encourage women to apply for or nominate someone for these positions in the administration?
Absolutely, and I would also say that you know, we look at Emerge Virginia, the new organization that's kind of coming from Emerge, the National Emerge organization, and the Farm Team in Virginia. They've been wonderful advocates for women candidates, and the Sorensen Institute for Political Leadership that Tarina and I have participated in really level the playing field for women who are looking for ways to engage in the political process as leaders, whether in an elected capacity or as public servants at the state level. There's a number of organizations and a number of ways in which organizations like ours can sponsor, can inform, and can put people in touch with others so that we become mentors as well for women candidates and for people who will advocate for the real, sensible, kind of inclusive, tolerant, pro-family kinds of issues that we're talking about that benefit everybody.
And I think Tim Kaine, when he ran, really said it well when he said to George Allen in their debate, women's issues are economic issues.
Absolutely.
And that will be the hallmark, I hope, of what people remember about Tim Kaine, is that he put the two together and he won his election for U.S. Senate based on the idea that there's it totally resonated. Absolutely. So I think that's something we all need to hang on to. So, women and economy.
That's right.
Too many women get hit by their boyfriends and husbands. Too many women are pressured into having unprotected sex. Half of the people in the world living with AIDS are women. It doesn't have to be this way. Together, we can change this reality. Let's strive for a world free of violence.
At Volunteers of America, we don't just give kids a way to stay off the streets. We give them the tools they need to reach their full potential. We don't just help the elderly receive needed care. We help them live life to the fullest. We don't just provide food for homeless individuals and families. We provide job training and placement so they can buy groceries. Volunteers of America is a national organization that for over 100 years has provided programs and services that allow people to overcome their challenges to become vital members of their community. At Volunteers of America, we don't just help people, we help people help themselves. Find out how you can support the programs that are working in your community. Contact Volunteers of America today. Call 1-800-899-0089.
Drivers face all kinds of distractions.
Guys, stop playing. No. Of 127 consecutive.
Before your wireless phone becomes one of them, stop. Drive safely. Keep your phone in easy reach and dial sensibly. In bad weather or traffic, call later and use a hands-free device. Remember, with wireless, safety is your call.
All right, see you.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again.
Wait a second, I'm not ready.
Welcome back. I'm Catherine Reed, and I'm filling in for Bettina Lawton, who's your regular host of Inside Scoop. Joining me in this segment are two delegate candidates who recently ran in the 2013 elections for the House of Delegates. To my left is Jennifer Boysko, who ran in the 86th district against Tom Rust, and Kathleen Murphy, who ran in the 34th district against Barbara Comstock. So these women ran very great, wonderful races with very narrow margins. There's 54 votes hanging in the balance between Jennifer and Tom Rust. So Jennifer is not conceded, and there may or may not be a recount, so there's still a big question mark there. So with Kathleen, she had less than 400 votes when all was said and done, I believe, after the provisionals were counted. Less than 400 votes hung between her and Barbara Comstock. So I know that, having run for office myself, that this is not exactly the conversation you want to be having the victory lap. But we need to talk about this because, as I said previously, 24 Democratic women ran. The 12 incumbents were reelected, and the 12 challengers did not win a seat. On top of which, 2 Republican women who held seats are not coming back to the legislature. Annie Crockett Stark retired. Down in Southwest Virginia was replaced by a very nice gentleman, I'm sure. And Bev Sherwood was primaried by a Tea Party candidate, Mark Berg, who is now going to be the representative for the 29th district. So we have fewer women in 2014 than we had in 2013. And I want to hear what you ladies think needs to happen based on your own races and based on what you have observed as part of the process. What do we need to do to not just get women to run, but get them elected? Jennifer.
Well, that's certainly the question of the day, isn't it? Because with such great candidates that we had, we worked very hard and put everything out on the table. I think mentoring is a crucial stage for the future. I think also making sure that our candidates are well versed and understand all the issues and are not one issue candidates is imperative as well. And then to make sure that you have someone who is there motivating and inspiring and being honest about what it's going to take, because I think that it's a very difficult endeavor, and especially if you're taking on someone who is an entrenched incumbent, you need someone standing behind you, making sure that you have the stamina and the tenacity to do what you have to do. So that, in a nutshell.
So Kathleen, how was your experience in this race?
Well, I didn't win, so it was disappointing. We ran a very, very tough race, and we started in December. We knew that Barbara was going to outraise us money-wise, probably 2 to 1. But we stayed with her, and the way I like to describe it is I started at 0 because I hadn't run before. I got over 14,500 votes, and she started at about 12,000, which is what she had gotten in her previous 2 elections, and she only went up to 14,900 votes. So she did win, but we did a darn good job and came very close. And so she has to be looking over her shoulder going forward. The thing that mattered most here for us, we think, was one thing. Number one, her inability to tell the truth about her voting record, and number 2, her ability to raise money from outside resources like Citizens United.
And that's one of the things that Mark Rozelle talked about this morning with the advertising. Somebody asked a question about the negative ads, and he said, Terry McAuliffe had resources to run a lot of advertising, and at the end of the day, what matters is they hear your name.
Yeah.
The content of the ads is not so relevant as the fact that you have money to put into putting your name out there constantly, which makes a difference. And that's why these campaigns have gotten out of control cost-wise, even at the delegate level. Now, you know, people have talked before, what is the logic behind candidates who have to raise $500,000 for a job that pays what, $18,000 a year?
I don't think it's that much.
So the question, so it really is out of whack. You know, why do people run? Why did each of you run? Why did you run, Jennifer?
I ran because I'm so concerned with the future of Virginia, you know, with education, with women's health, with mental health, and just watching special interest really control everything. And if you look at my fundraising record versus my opponents, I received donations from over 7,000 individuals. The vast majority of them gave under $100, and I raised nearly $400,000. My opponent had a few hundred donors. A huge amount of them were in the $10,000 to $20,000 range, and very few individuals. They were PAC, you know, they were corporate people, they were special interests, they were lobbyists. And as you ask, why is it that that kind of money is involved? It's because there's so much at stake. You know, we're talking about our lives, our futures. It's not just a $20,000 job. It's really making decisions on behalf of the entire state to make our lives better. I felt like I would be able to do that and stand up against special interest. I felt like I would have judgment because I've been here in the community working with folks, understanding where their problems are, and I'm not afraid to say what I think.
And you had a really tough race too. Not that yours was very tough against an incumbent, but you are the third woman, right? I mean,
yes.
Margie Vanderhye ran against Barbara Comstock, then Pamela Danner ran.
Yes.
So you were number 3. And this was an unusual race because it was 2 women running against each other, which I think only happened in one other race, and that was Kathy Byron and Katie Webb-Seifert. Yeah, right. Down in Lynchburg, and she didn't win either. So the dynamic, and in Northern Virginia, which is considered blue, I mean, both of you are in what would be blue districts,
right,
or they are blue voting districts in other elections. So you are in sort of this bizarre little bubble in Northern Virginia.
Well, again, I'm going to say it. I ran against a candidate, a delegate, who has no relationship with the truth. She tells you that she voted for funding for our schools when she voted against the budget that funded our schools. She'll tell you that she voted to protect women's health issues because she voted for a piece of paper that said that if after a woman who can afford a mammogram gets one, that she has to be given a piece of paper that says if you have dense breasts, you should be careful.
So why does that resonate with McLean voters, though, or
because she lies. They did not know that she voted against them on almost every issue of any importance to women and families and anybody. She voted against transportation. That's bad for business. She voted against funding for education. She goes out, she sends out wonderful little flyers with all the money that she has. She goes on television and says that she funded 1,700 more in-state slots in our schools. Completely not true. How do you campaign against someone who has no conscience about lying?
Well, so that's what, and that is the million-dollar question here, is that if we are going to make inroads, what do we have to do differently?
Well, we're not going to lie.
Well, true enough. And we need candidates who run more than once.
Right.
I mean, you know, Ken Plum is one who says, you know, he lost twice.
Right.
He is the poster child for tenacity and persistence. It's because Ken will tell anyone, I ran and I lost, and I ran and I lost, and then I ran and I won. And he's been serving his district ever since. But a lot of people don't have the stamina. And do women, let's be honest, do women have the stamina to do that?
Well, I'll tell you, I am planning to run again. You know, it's a shame to work this hard for at least a year to just give up all that knowledge and experience. I think you have to be able to stick it out another year. I always planned that. I didn't know when I got into this that I would do as well as I did. And we have to be willing to stand up and support those folks who are willing to do it another time.
Plus, she has all this name recognition now. It would be a shame to waste it.
Yeah.
That's true. And so, what about you, Kathleen? How do you feel?
I'm the non-committal candidate.
It's a little early. I understand it's a little early.
I'm still curing my bruises.
You know, and like I said,
it's only been 2 weeks.
I know, and I have been there, so it's kind of like I understand what it is to run and lose. You know, and nobody. First of all, I think people don't understand what it's like to be a candidate. Nothing you can tell people. Right. All volunteering. I've knocked doors. You've knocked doors. We've all done it. Nothing prepares you for being the candidate.
Nothing does.
True. And nothing really prepares you for being a losing candidate. Yes, it is. And then at the end of it, you don't even have, you know, your flag to plant. So let's talk about support. And I think this really is very key. We were touched on it a little bit in the last segment about this idea of advocacy, mentoring, sponsorship. You know, one of the races that was interesting to watch was Marcus Simon, because Marcus Simon took Jim Scott's position, and they have a long-term relationship, Marcus having started out as his legislative aide. So clearly, Jim Scott knew the candidate could put his resources, his advocacy, everything behind Marcus. How can we bring that to bear for women candidates? In the LGBT community, we talk about the fact that we can't move the ball forward without allies. You have to have allies. The community itself, where we've gotten with equality is because of allies. If women are going to move forward in Virginia, our allies, right, are men of influence and power who are already sitting in the chair.
But to them, we're still women.
So how do we address that? What are we going to ask these people who can influence or advocate or mentor new candidates? How are we going to ask? Who are we going to ask? What are we going to ask these people of influence to do for us?
I think first of all we need to create mentors out of our women's community, because I don't think that we can always expect men to be our mentors, even if they're the ones in power. We've got enough women in power. We've got enough Kirsten Gillibrands and others that are out there willing to be our mentors. But we have to create old girl networks, just like they have their old boy networks, because that pulling the woman up behind you is an important part of this whole effort to get more women involved and to have more women be successful.
Oh, I agree. And in your race, I think one of the hallmarks, you had a very difficult race because Tom Rust is considered a sometimes ally of the Democratic legislative agenda issues.
Even though he votes 97% of the time with the Republicans.
Right.
Let's make sure we clarify that.
And it's perception, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Really is perception.
Yes.
But the fact that he is a friend on the other side of the aisle.
He's not the worst of the worst.
Correct.
That's what you hear so often. Well, you know, he's not Cuccinelli.
So there were people within our party who were not necessarily terribly enthusiastic about the fact that you were challenging him.
Right.
So, for instance, there were House of Delegate candidates that got endorsements and appearances and help from Senator Keene and Senator Warner and Senator Saslaw, and you know there was an absence.
Yes, there was.
And so, what message? And when we come back, because I hear the music cueing. When we come back, we will come back and talk about what that absence means when we do not have people there who are willing to step up, as we were talking about, and stand behind, advocate for, and use their influence.
Yeah.
We'll return in a minute.
Around the world, 1 out of every 3 women will be beaten or otherwise abused in their lifetime, often by a family member or loved one. A future free from violence. It's all she's ever wished for.
Did you know you have the power to stop children from joining gangs? You can help a father find a job and home for his family. You can assist a woman who can't afford the medicine she needs to live and the home she can't live without. You can choose to make a difference in our community. Support Volunteers of America, and you can help improve the lives of nearly 2 million Americans each year with programs and services that help individuals and families overcome their challenges to become as independent as possible. Support the programs that are working in our community. Contact Volunteers of America today. Call 1-800-899-0089.
For some folks, saving for the future is easy, but for you, it might take a little more effort. Saving for your future is your responsibility, and there's a lot to save for.
I never thought of that.
Like your child's education, perhaps uncovered medical expenses, or just to be sure you can live the way you want when you retire. The time is now to save for tomorrow. Save now or work forever. The choice is yours. Choose to save.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm Catherine Reed, filling in for Bettina Lawton, and we have a entertaining interlude. We're going to play a clip for you before we return to our guests. No, they're not ready for that. So I guess what we're going to do is return to our guests. All right. One of the things that I had asked before we broke for the announcement, that public service announcement, was I asked Jennifer to think about what the absence of support, key support and advocacy, had meant in her race. So Jennifer, you've had a minute to think about.
Sure. Well, you know, actually what I have done is focused on the people who did come to the table for me, and I had some wonderful leaders who showed a lot of support and got behind me and were willing to take a risk. What the viewers might not know is I'm one of the very only people who had a Democratic primary as well. So I've had 2 races this year, and I had Congressman Jerry Conley came out for me in the primary. I had a huge list of elected officials who were willing to take that step and to say that they believed in me, and that meant a lot to me. So I can't worry if someone feels politically that it's not safe enough for them to come out and say something, because I have to work on what I know, and I have to be there with the people who are willing to stand up for me. And you know, we came in within 54 votes of dethroning the incoming chair of the Transportation Committee. I'd say I'm pretty proud of the work we did, and thrilled that the people who believed in me were able to step up. So, you know, you just move on.
And I think that's a great attitude to have. So another race that was unique to Fairfax County was happening concurrently with both of your races, and that was Stacey Kincaid's race for the sheriff of Fairfax County. And she was running as the first female candidate for the sheriff's position. Mm-hmm. And from her primary with the acting sheriff who'd been appointed, right through to the end of the election where her opponent took out ads in the Washington Post, it was an ugly race.
Yeah,
it was.
You should have seen it at live forums.
Yeah.
It was beyond ugly. He attacked, and he attacked, and it was baseless. It was really, really uncomfortable for people in the audience, and even people who were on his side began to feel like he was a little bit over the edge.
And how do you think that affects the people who are sitting there going, holy cow? Yeah. I mean, as we've talked in the previous segment, women don't do things that way. I mean, we're problem solvers, we're advocates, we're collaborators, we're focused on solutions, we're inclusive.
Yeah, the thing that I think is important is to take a step back and say this. This is 2013. 2013. And we keep hearing, look how far we've come, and I want to say this to you. It is 2013. When will we be able to say that we have arrived? These things shouldn't happen. It shouldn't matter whether we're women running against men or women running against women. We should have arrived, and this should no longer be an issue. Mm-hmm. Women's right to make their own health care decisions should not be an issue. Women's right to choose to run or not to run, to stay home with their children or to go to work outside of the home is no one's business except their own, except that we should be paid equally. It's no longer acceptable. It's been over 50 years since John F. Kennedy passed a bill that said we had to be paid the same, and we're still not paid the same. So what can we change Other than to talk about women's health care issues, that's really not the only point we need to talk about. We need to talk about women's economic issues.
Absolutely.
And that is an excellent point, and that's kind of what we closed with in the last segment too, is the fact that Tim Kaine used that effectively in his debate at the Fairfax County Chamber of Commerce with George Allen. When George Allen said said people don't want to talk about these issues, these divisive issues, these women issues, and Tim Kaine said, women's issues are economic issues.
Yes, they are.
And that is something, how many more times is that going to have to be said before people truly embrace it? And I think one of the things that we have to take a look at, and the ugly race that Stacey Kincaid had brings it home, are the subtle biases, the subtle cues.
They're not so subtle.
Well, they're not, but I'll tell you a subtle one. I'll tell you a really subtle one. The night of the election, Ken Cuccinelli quoted Patrick Henry and Thomas Jefferson. Terry McAuliffe quoted Thomas Jefferson. Bob McDonald quoted Thomas Jefferson. So you think to yourself,
they couldn't quote Betsy Ross.
Exactly.
She didn't have a good quote, right?
So my point is that it's not intentional. I don't believe it's intentional. They were our founding fathers. What we have to come to a realization of is that only white, propertied, privileged, educated men could found this country.
Sure.
We need a narrative that goes beyond these white revolutionary heroes, that speaks to the people who do the living, the dying, the tax paying, and the voting in Virginia. And it's not Patrick Henry and Thomas Jefferson. But do our elected leaders realize that when they keep throwing these examples of our tradition in front of people, that they are galvanizing this idea that that's what Virginia politicians look like? I mean,
well, it is what they look like.
It is what they look like. That's not what we look like.
But you know, by us running, by you speaking out, we are giving the next generation a narrative that is different than the one that we had. You know, I've got 2 teenage daughters, and I hear from their friends and from their friends' parents how inspired they were to watch this so close up, to be able to work on a campaign of somebody's mom who, you know, was at the field hockey game with them the week before. Yeah. So we are starting to give them some new role models, some new examples of being tough, of standing honestly and with dignity, so that we are not, you know, having to make that decision. Do we get in the mud and roll around, or do we be ourselves and carry ourselves in the way that we feel comfortable and proud of ourselves? And then there will be more opportunities to quote from, because you will remember what Kathleen just said, you know. There's future. There is a future for us, and it's just one step at a time. The town of Herndon has a lovely mayor who is a woman who has young children in kindergarten and grade school, and she, you know, is working on economic development and doing all kinds of exciting things in the town that have nothing to do with her being a woman or, you know, focusing on women's issues, but she is carrying the ball forward. We see that all over the place. It's just happening small increments.
And I think that's a good point. You bring up a good point. Tarina Keene had said that there are policy and administrative roles in the new governor's administration, and that women should step up, they should apply, they should nominate other women, qualified people. But let's talk about local government, because you're right, the Herndon Town Council is majority women, first woman mayor. We do, Sharon Bulova leads the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors. Kate Hanley was her predecessor leading the Board of Supervisors. We have made traction in local government. Is that the strategy? Is that our farm team for the House of Delegates, for the Congress, for the Senate?
Well, I think that there are some things that have occurred in recent years that have indicated that until there is a critical mass on any board or in any House of Delegates or in the Senate, before things will change. And we see it in the U.S. Senate, certainly. But it hasn't happened on the state level yet, not on this state level. So you've got people who are moving in that direction, and we're working toward it, and we're not going to give up. This is not something that will go away simply because we didn't win this time.
Right.
We will beat these people next time.
And I think that is a great attitude to have. I'm getting a signal that they've got the clip ready that they want to show, so we're going to segue just for a minute to this clip. Is it really ready?
Now, when I was a kid, my mother always told me to always open doors for women and make sure that when you're on the street, you're on the outside and the woman goes on the inside. And always respect women. Now, I know things have changed just a little bit, but I'm seeing a lot of politicians who are not really listening to what their mother said. As a matter of fact, they're downright disrespecting women's rights. Washington, guys, listen, I know you think you know best. Remember the days when father knew best? See, but those days have changed because we realized that, well, Dad wouldn't make it to work. He certainly wouldn't remember a lunch and wouldn't really probably get to work if he didn't have the right directions if it wasn't for Mom. Where the hell am I? I bet women had a lot more to do with the success of men in history than we read. But then again, we don't really hear about that a lot, do we? Nope. Mainly because men have put themselves in charge of writing the books. Now, I'm not being left or right with this next statement, but I believe that maybe we should be putting Mom into office. I mean, at least it'd be organized. But I do have a feeling, though, that there'd be an awful lot of congressmen in timeout. I will learn to be bipartisan. But while you boys are still in office, why don't you start running it the way Mom would run it? Not the way your drunken, deadbeat, midlife crisis dad, like Congress, would do. I'm Will Roberts, and this is your Weekly Telegram. Now, when I was a kid,
Welcome back. That was a very interesting from Will Says. I think he's right on the money. Let's put Mom in office. How are we going to do that? So I'm here with Jennifer Boysko and Kathleen Murphy, and we are contemplating what's it going to look like for the future of women candidates, what has to happen both within the Commonwealth of Virginia. We have organizations like Emerge Virginia who has come in, partnered with the Farm Team, which is an existing organization, to really focus a lot of energy and a lot of resources on supporting, identifying, recruiting, training, supporting, and it has to be in that order, identifying, recruiting, training, supporting women candidates. And so there's an event on December 7th that people are welcome to attend in Oakton to learn more about being a candidate, supporting candidates, and just a word real quickly from each of you about inter-organizational support for candidates and how going forward that might be tweaked to be a little bit different, a little stronger, a little more effective from the candidate's chair.
Well, you know, we were fortunate, both of us were fortunate to have the support from all of the women focused candidate organizations. Thank you. But it was kind of piecemeal, so how could we better coordinate? I don't know if they're...
Let's try it this way. We got endorsed by Emily's List, and Emily's List sent a person to each of our campaign offices for visits. But that never translated into Emily's List sending out a solicitation on our behalf, because they don't do that at the state level. It would be helpful if they would.
Well, and we're wrapping up the show, and I think that's a great final thought, that we really need to have people stepping up in a substantive way at the state level for our candidates.
Yeah.
And I certainly hope that both of you will run again. I know that's not necessarily a decision. Jennifer, you've made it. Kathleen, you need to think about it. But a decision that we need to think about if we are going to keep chipping away at making progress in our elected offices here in Virginia. And I thank both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
You guys were great.